Stories of Futures Past presents 6 stories featuring the wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey stuff. Experiment by Fredric Brown. Picture Bride by Joseph Samachson. Peter Merton's Private Mint by Harlan, Ellison. Vassi by Art Lewis. The Prophetic Camera by John McGreevey. Remember the Fourth by Noel M. Loomis.
Experiment by Fredric Brown. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, February 1954. Narrated by Trussel. The first time machine, gentlemen, Professor Johnson proudly informed his 2 colleagues. True, it is a small-scale experimental model. It will operate only on objects weighing less than 3 pounds, 5 ounces, and for distances into the past and future of 12 minutes or less. But it works. The small-scale model looked like a small scale, a postage scale, except for 2 dials in the part under the platform. Professor Johnson held up a small metal cube. Our experimental object, he said, is a brass cube weighing 1 pound, 2.3 ounces. First I shall send it 5 minutes into the future. He leaned forward and set one of the dials on the time machine. Look at your watches, he said. They looked at their watches. Professor Johnson placed the cube gently on the machine's platform. It vanished. 5 minutes later, to the second, it reappeared. Professor Johnson picked it up. Now 5 minutes into the past. He set the other dial. Holding the cube in his hand, he looked at his watch. It is 6 minutes before 3 o'clock. I shall now activate the mechanism by placing the cube on the platform at exactly 3 o'clock. Therefore, the cube should, at 5 minutes before 3, vanish from my hand and appear on the platform 5 minutes before I place it there. How can you place it there, then? Asked one of his colleagues. It will, as my hand approaches, vanish from the platform and appear in my hand to be placed there. 3 o'clock. Notice, please. The cube vanished from his hand. It appeared on the platform of the time machine. See? 5 minutes before I shall place it there, it is there. His other colleague frowned at the cube. But, he said, what if now that it has already appeared 5 minutes before you place it there, you should change your mind about doing so and not place it there at 3 o'clock? Wouldn't there be a paradox of some sort involved? An interesting idea, Professor Johnson said. I had not thought of it, and it will be interesting to try. Very well, I shall not. There was no paradox at all. The cube remained. But the entire rest of the universe, professors and all, vanished.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Picture Bride by Joseph Samachson, writing as William Morrison. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, June 1955. Narrated by Trussel. My brother Perry always was a bit cracked. As a kid, he almost blew up our house doing experiments. When he was 18, he wrote poetry, but fortunately that didn't last long, and he went back to science. Now, when he showed me this picture, I figured he'd had a relapse of some kind. This is the girl I'm in love with, he said. She wasn't bad, not bad at all, even if her clothes were crazy. She wasn't my type, too brainy looking, although I could see how some guys would go for her. I thought you liked blondes. I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all the blondes in Hollywood, he answered. This is the only girl for me. You sound as if you've got it bad, I said. You're going to marry her? His face dropped about a mile. I can't. You mean she's married already? I was surprised. This wasn't like Perry at all. He sort of hesitated, as if he was afraid of saying too much. No, she isn't married. I asked her about that, but I can't marry her because, well, I've never met her. All I've seen of her is this picture and a few more. She doesn't live here. You mean she's in Europe? I've heard of these love affairs by mail, and they never made much sense to me. I said to Perry, why can't she come to this country? Oh, there are a lot of things in the way. It sounded worse and worse. I said, look, Perry, this smells like a racket to me. It's the kind of thing a couple of shrewd operators cook up to take some hick for a ride. I'm surprised at you falling for it. How do you know there really is a dame like that in Europe? Anybody can send pictures. You've got it all wrong, he said. I've spoken to her. By phone? How do you know who's on the other end? You hear a dame's voice you've never heard before. What makes you think it's hers? Again, he didn't seem to want to talk, as if he had some secret to hide. But I guess he felt like getting things off his chest, too, or he wouldn't have opened up in the first place. And he had already told me enough so that if he didn't tell me more, he'd sound like a dope. So after hesitating even longer than before, he said, Let's get this straight, George. This is no racket. I've seen and talked to her at the same time, and the things she talked about no conman would know. You've seen and talked to her at the same time? You mean by TV? I don't believe it. They can't send TV to Europe. I didn't say it was TV, and I didn't say she lived in Europe. That's exactly what you did say. Or maybe you meant she lived on Mars. No, she's an American. This makes less and less sense to me. Where did you meet her? He turned red and squirmed all over the place. Finally he said, Right here in my own laboratory. In your own laboratory? But you said you never met her in the flesh. I didn't. Not really by TV either. The fact is, she isn't born yet. I backed away from him. When he was a kid and blew up our kitchen, I didn't like it. When he wrote poetry, I was kind of ashamed and didn't want my pals to know he was my brother. Now, I was really scared. Everything he had been saying in the last 10 minutes began to make sense, but a screwy kind of sense. He saw how I felt. Don't worry, George, I haven't gone crazy. Her time is 2973, more than 1,000 years from now. The only way I've seen and talked to her is on a time contact machine. Come again? A kind of time machine. It can't send material objects back and forth across time, as far as I know, but it can send certain waves, especially the kind we use to transmit signals. That's how she and I could talk to each other and see each other. Perry, I think you ought to see a good doctor. It's a remarkable device, he said, paying no attention to how I was trying to help him. She's the one who first constructed it and contacted me. It's based on an extension of Einstein's equations. You think you can explain so much, I said. Okay then, explain this. This dame isn't going to be born for 1,000 years, and yet you tell me you're in love with her. What's the difference between you and somebody that's nuts? I asked, as if anybody knew the answer. He certainly didn't. In fact, he went ahead and proved to me that they were the same thing, because for the next couple of weeks the only thing he'd talk about, outside of equations I couldn't understand, was this dame. How smart she was, and how beautiful she was, and how wonderful she was in every way that a dame can be wonderful, and how she loved him. For a time he had me convinced that she actually existed. Compared with you, I said, Romeo had a mild case. There are some quantities so great that you can't measure them, he said. That will give you some idea of our love for each other." There it went, the old poetry, cropping out in him just like before, and all the time I'd been thinking it was like measles, something that you get once, and it builds up your resistance so you don't get it again. At least not bad. It just goes to show how wrong I could be. "What preacher are you going to get to marry you?" I asked. "A guy born 500 years from now?" "I don't think that's funny," he said. "You're telling me. Look, Perry, you're smart enough to know what I'm thinking. You still think I'm crazy." "I got an open mind on the subject. Now, if you won't see a doctor, then how about letting me take a look at this dame so I can convince myself?" "No," he said. "I've considered doing that and decided against it. Her voice and image come through for only about 5 minutes a day, sometimes less, and those minutes are very precious to us. We don't want anyone else present, anyone at all." "Not even to convince me she actually exists?" "You wouldn't be convinced anyway," he said very shrewdly. "No matter what I showed you, you'd still find a reason to call it a fraud." He was right at that. It would take a lot of convincing to make me believe that a babe who wasn't going to get born for 1,000 years was in love with him. By this time, though, I was sure of one thing. There was something screwy going on in that laboratory of his. For 5 minutes a day he was watching some dame's picture, listening to her voice. If I had an idea what she was like, I might figure out where to go from there. I began keeping an eye on Perry, dropping in at the laboratory to pay him visits. There was what looked like a 10-inch TV tube in one corner of his place, not housed in a cabinet, but lying on the table among dozens of other tubes and rheostats and meters and other things I didn't know about. Along the wall that led from this corner was a lot of stuff which Perry said was high voltage and warned me not to touch. I kept away. I wasn't trying to figure out how to get myself killed. All I wanted to know was when he saw this girl. Finally, I managed to pin the time down to between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. For 5 minutes every day, during that hour, he locked the door and didn't answer phone calls. I figured that if I dropped in then, I might get a glimpse of her. And that's what I did. At first, when I knocked on the door, there was no answer. In a minute, though, I heard Perry's voice, but he wasn't talking to me. He was saying, "Darling," and he sounded kind of sick, which I figured was due to love. Come to think of it, he might have been scared a little. I heard him say, "Don't be afraid," and it was quiet for about 15 seconds. Then I heard a terrific crash, like lightning striking. The door shook, and I smelled something sharp, and the first thing I wanted to do was get out of that place, but I couldn't leave my brother in there. I put my shoulder to the door and had no trouble at all. The explosion, or whatever it was, must have weakened the hinges. As the door crashed in, I looked for Perry. There was no sign of him, but I could see his shoes on the floor in front of that TV tube, where he must have been standing. No feet in them, though, just his socks. All the high-voltage stuff was smoking. The TV screen was all lit up, and on it I could see a girl's face, the same girl whose picture Perry had shown me. She was wearing one of those funny costumes, and she looked scared. It was a clear picture, and I can even see the way she gulped. Then she broke out into a happy smile, and for about half a second, before the second explosion, I could see Perry on the screen. After that second explosion, even though it wasn't near as big as the first, that TV set was nothing but a mess of twisted junk, and there was no screen left to see anything on. Perry liked to have everything just so, and he'd never think of going any place without his tie being knotted just right and his socks matching, and so on. And here he travelled 1,000 years into the future in bare feet. I felt kind of embarrassed for him. Anyway, they were engaged, and now they must be married. so I guess she had slippers waiting for him. I'm just sorry I missed the wedding.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Peter Merton's Private Mint by Harlan Ellison, writing as Lee Archer. Originally published in Fantastic, October 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Peter Merton sat at his desk after the district attorney's men left and put his head in his hands. He was still sitting that way when Miss Irene Simmons came in. "Here's the rest of the morning's mail, Mr. Merton," she said. Merton didn't even look up. He was a young, good-looking man in his late 20s, the type known as a rising young executive, possibly because that's exactly what he was. But he did not look young this morning. His interview with the DA had added years to his appearance. He felt old and haggard. "Just put them on the desk," he said. His voice sounded tired. She put the letters on the desk, but when she didn't leave immediately, Peter Merton looked up. Irene Simmons was an average-sized girl with golden brown hair, large blue eyes, a full red mouth, and a lush figure. She looked as though she ought to be working as a bathing suit model instead of as the private secretary to a vice president of Crabley and Company. "Does it look pretty bad, Mr. Merton?" she asked. "It looks horrible," he said bleakly. "The DA said that since Quiggs had had 4 days to get away, the money is probably in South America by now." He put his hand over his eyes. "If only I hadn't been such a fool. Why did I put the money in my office safe instead of in the company vault? $50,000. The insurance company won't pay because a policy says that cash has to be kept in the vault. But how was I to know that Quiggs would come sneaking in here during Christmas vacation and take it out of my safe? He's been working for the company for years. Who would have thought it?" "Frankly, Mr. Merton, I think he was jealous because you were made a vice president instead of him," Irene said firmly. "I think he wanted to ruin you." "Well, he certainly has," Peter said sadly. "Old man Crabley says that putting the money in my safe was criminal negligence. He says he wants me to pay it back, or he'll see that I'm blackballed by every company in the business after he fires me." I'm very sorry, Mr. Merton. I'm sure you'll think of something. The police may catch him after all." "Thank you, Miss Simmons. I hope so," Peter said. But his voice didn't hold much hope. As the girl left the room, Peter absently watched the swaying of her hips as she walked, but he was too upset to appreciate the view fully. He had a serious problem to consider. He thought over what she had said. So Quiggs had been jealous, eh? That probably explained the fact that he had left a $5 bill in the safe. With his odd sense of humour, Quiggs had probably thought it very funny to leave a 5 note in place of the 50,000 he had taken. There was no doubt that it was Quiggs. The police were certain of the guilty person. Quiggs had been seen coming into the office on the Thursday night before Christmas vacation, and had left only half an hour later. He had evidently taken the money out and replaced it with a bundle of wrapped paper. Some hours later, he had checked out of his apartment, and all trace of him had been lost. Peter looked up at the Watteau print which concealed the heavy steel door of the wall safe. $5 lay behind it, all that was left of 50,000. He got up, walked over to the safe, twisted the combination, and pulled the door open. He reached in, took out the bill,
and looked at it, and looked again with wide eyes, because it wasn't a $5 bill at all. It was a thin sheet of paper-like plastic, folded up to about the same size as a banknote. Puzzled, Peter looked into the safe again. Nothing. He thrust his hand in and felt around. Still nothing. Except for the sheet of stuff he held in his hand, the safe was as empty as a church on Monday. Unfolding the folded sheet, Peter saw that it was covered with print. The characters were oddly shaped, and the phraseology was queer, but it was unmistakably English. Peter Merton sat on the edge of his desk and began to read. Honourable Mr., Miss or Mrs., to whoever you are in the 20th century, we of the 30th century send greetings. We hope this epistle will be understandable. Our knowledge of the language of English is maybe not as good as might be. Our studies of your time are somewhat hampered by lack of records, and it for this reason is that we contact you. In order for the time transfer field to work, it must be entirely surrounded by thick metal. Also, a piece of similar material must be in place so that transfer can be effected in accordance with the Voorish equations. If you wish to cooperate in this history-seeking venture, please place a note to such effect in your metal box. Rolath Guelph, Terrestrial Bureau of Historical Investigation. Peter frowned and read the thing again. Who would write such silliness? Could it be another joke by Quiggs? No, it couldn't be. He, Peter Merton, had put that $5 bill back into the safe, and he hadn't left the room while it was in there. He looked up at the open safe. It was still empty. Well, by golly, he'd see whether this was a hoax or not. He pulled his gold-plated desk pen out of its crystal holder, took a piece of office stationery, and wrote, Dear Mr. Guelph, I'm very much interested in your proposition, but I would like to have you explain a little bit more about it. Very truly yours, Peter Merton. He folded it and put it in the safe. Then he sat down and watched it. He watched it for 15 minutes before he decided that nothing was going to happen. Finally, he walked over and took out the paper. It was the same as it had been when he put it in. He looked back at the plastic sheet. Aha! It said, In order for the time transfer field to work, it must be surrounded entirely by thick metal. He put the note back in, and this time he closed and locked the door. 3 minutes later, he opened it again. This time there was another folded sheet of plastic. It said, Dear Mr. Merton, understanding time transfer is very simple. Of course, the science of your time would be unable to build such a machine, but what happens is essentially this. If you put something in your metal box, we can pick it up and bring it to our time. However, there must be an equivalent exchange of matter, so we have to send something to your century too. This must be done in accordance with the law of entropy. What we need mostly are historical documents, newspapers, books, and magazines of your era. Please send only factual material, no fiction. We will want fiction later, but not now. Here is a list of things we would like to have. Peter read down the list and blinked in amazement at some of these things. The letter ended with, In return for this, we will send an equal weight of some of our old museum pieces of paper. Papers like the one we took from you. Things called money. Will this be satisfactory? Here is a sample. Yours very truly, Rolath Guelph. Money? Peter looked at the bill that was enclosed. It was a $500 note, and they said they would exchange pound for pound. That meant that for £1 of old newspapers he would get £1 of banknotes. It sounded screwy, But Peter Merton was not a man to argue. If it worked, fine. If it didn't, what could he lose? Peter jammed his hat on his head, folded the list and the $500 in his pocket, and strode out the door. He stopped in the outer office at the desk of Miss Simmons, who was typing up some letters. "Come along, Miss Simmons," he said. "Get your hat. We have some things to do." Miss Simmons looked startled, but she did as she was bid. 15 minutes later, they were in a second-hand bookshop on 6th Avenue. Peter squinted at the list in the dim light. "I want The Story of English by Mario Pei," he said to the proprietor, "and The Story of Language by the same author. Give me a copy of the Memoirs of Winston Churchill, He went on like that for several minutes, and the pile of books in front of him began to grow. Then he browsed through the magazine section, looking for back issues of Life, Time, and Scientific American. He told Miss Simmons to get a taxi, and they began loading the stuff in the back seat. Then they drove to the New York Times building and got back issues of the past year. With all this loot, they drove back to the offices of Crabley and Company. It was during the ride back that Peter wondered whether it was possible that the people of the future had stolen the money that Quiggs had been blamed for and replaced it with a bundle of paper. But he shook his head. It couldn't be. The bundle had been made of cut-up newspapers, and besides, they had Quiggs's fingerprints all over them. Miss Simmons helped him get the stuff into his office, and then she said, "Mr. Merton, I don't like to butt into your business, but may I ask what all this literature is for?" Grinning happily, Peter Merton swore the girl to secrecy. Then he told her what had happened. As he finished the story, Miss Simmons began to edge slowly toward the door. "And so, I had to get these books and things. They're evidently doing research into history. These are books they've lost somehow. Imagine what it would be like if our historians could get copies of the books that were burned at the Library of Alexandria, and— Just a minute. Where are you going, Miss Simmons?" Miss Simmons smiled a sickly smile. "Oh, nowhere. Are you sure you feel all right, Mr. Merton?" "Do I feel—" Peter looked blank. "Oh, I see. You think I've gone off my rocker. Well, we'll see. Maybe I have, but I don't think so. Look, I'll prove it to you." He scribbled a note to Rolath Guelph and put it inside the safe with a couple of the books. Then he closed the safe. He waited 3 minutes and opened it again. Irene Simmons's eyes opened wide in astonishment, and her mouth formed a crimson O. Tumbling out of the safe came sheaf after sheaf of banknotes. "Now do you believe me?" Peter asked triumphantly. Yes. What else can I believe? Are they real?" He picked one of the bills up and looked at it closely. "It's real, all right. I started out in business as a bank teller, and I know how to tell a counterfeit. This is the real McCoy, all right." "Well, my goodness," was all Miss Simmons could say for a moment. Then, after the shock of seeing all that money had lessened a little, she asked, "What are you going to do with it, Peter?" "The first thing I'm going to do," he said, "is return that $50,000 to Mr. Crabley. Here, help me gather this stuff up and sort it out into piles. We'll have to count it, too." The girl pitched in willingly and began to sort the bills. Swiftly they separated it. It was not until then that Peter Merton realized that the girl had called him by his first name. Was it the sight of all the money that had done it? Irene Simmons had never impressed him as the gold-digger type, but— Peter shrugged and went on stacking the money. When they had finished, Irene said, "There's not quite enough to pay back Mr. Crabley." "That's easily fixed," Peter said, grinning. He put in some more books, closed the safe, and waited. When he opened it again, more money came tumbling out. This time, there was enough to pay back the old man, and more besides. Peter sorted out a pile of the larger bills enough to make 50,000, and marched to Mr. Crabley's office. The engraving on the door said, J. Crabley, President. He rapped deferentially, and when a voice said, "Come in," Peter did exactly that. Old Man Crabley looked just like his name. He was a small, wizened, crab-faced man with yellowed skin and a totally bald head. "Well, sir, what is it this time?" he crackled. Peter began pulling her money out of the briefcase he had packed it in order to carry it to the old man's office. "I brought you the money, sir," Peter said. "You'll find it all there, $50,000. The old man's eyes lit up with pleasure. Peter could almost see the green glow of money in them. "Excellent," said Mr. Crabley. "So the police caught the thief, eh? He'll get 20 years for this." "No, sir," Peter replied. "They haven't caught Quiggs yet, and they haven't found the money. This is out of my savings." The old man's scraggly brows shot up. "Indeed? Savings? I didn't know you actually had that much." Well. He rubbed his hands together and frowned. "Well, this is really quite handsome of you, young man. You have more brains than I credit you with." He took out a letter opener and toyed with it. Finally he said, "Peter, my boy, I'll tell you. I really didn't mean that you should do this. I was simply trying to throw a scare into you. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, my boy. I'm going to place this to your account with the firm. Henceforth, you are a junior partner of Crabley and Company, to the tune of $50,000. In addition, I'll have Mr. Twythe, the firm's lawyer, draw up a paper which will give you all rights to whatever money is recovered from Quiggs by the police." Peter started to say something, but Old Man Crabley just patted the air with a hand. "Tut, tut, my boy. Think nothing of it. Any young man who can save a sum like that at your age deserves extra consideration. I have always admired a man who can make money." Peter thanked Mr. Crabley as best he could, and then he strolled back to his office feeling a rosy glow. During the following 2 weeks, Peter Merton's personal fortune grew by leaps and bounds. Most of the cash he kept in a trunk in his apartment. He knew that people would start to ask questions if he put too much of it in the bank at once, but he did put considerable sums in the bank nonetheless. The savings account was practically forced on him by Irene Simmons. She insisted that, even if he did have money in his trunk, it was conceivable that someone might steal it. Meanwhile, he bought a new Cadillac, several tailor-made suits at $250 per, a fur coat for Irene, and had his apartment completely redecorated with built-in bar complete. He became quite friendly with Irene Simmons, but he was convinced that the girl liked him simply because he had plenty of money. That didn't bother him too much. She was a beautiful girl, and Peter Merton had always had an eye for beauty. It was in the middle of the 3rd week that things began to change. The first thing that happened was a note from Peter's Futurian correspondent, Rolath Guelph. "Dear Mr. Merton," it read, "you have been most cooperative in this endeavour, and we appreciate it greatly. Your books have been very welcome, and have strengthened our knowledge of your times and language tremendously. Now, however, we would like a few artifacts of your civilization. Will you please send us samples of your clothing, both men's and women's styles? We would also appreciate various other things, such as—" And there followed another long list, similar to the one he had received before, except that it called for various manufactured objects. The letter was signed, as usual, "Very truly yours, Rolath Guelph." "Well, what do you think of that?" Peter said after reading it. Irene read it and said, "I have a dress I can send him, and you can send him one of your suits." Peter nodded. We'll have to buy some of these other things, though. An hour later, Peter stuffed a suit into the wall safe and closed the door. When he opened it, there was a small bundle of thin, strong material which, when unfolded, proved to be a suit, of sorts. It certainly looked different. Irene giggled when he held it out. "You couldn't wear that on the streets. It looks like something out of Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers." Peter grinned and put in Irene's dress. What he got back was a dress, but this time Irene didn't giggle when it was unfolded. "Why, that's perfectly gorgeous," she said in awe. "I wonder if it'll fit." "Here," said Peter, handing it to her. "Go find out. You can lead the fashion field, by a century to be exact." Irene took the dress and headed for the ladies' powder room. When she came back, it was all Peter could do to keep his eyes from popping out. On Irene, the rich, iridescent material made her look like a queen out of a Technicolor extravaganza. "Wow," said Peter feelingly. "It's too bad they don't have suits I can wear." "I'll show you something else, too," Irene said excitedly. "I accidentally spilled some water on it in the powder room, and look what happened." She proceeded to demonstrate by pouring water on her skirts from the carafe on Peter's desk. The water rolled off without wetting the material. Then she took the desk pen and shook some ink on it. "See," she chortled. "It rolls right off. It never has to be cleaned because it can't get dirty." Peter looked back at the Buck Rogers suit. "Maybe I can get a tailor to make a decent suit out of that thing." Irene shook her head. "I don't think so. There aren't any seams." Peter frowned and took a pair of scissors from his desk drawer. He took one sleeve of the suit and tried to cut it. It wouldn't cut. He jabbed at it with the point. The suit stubbornly refused to cut, snag, or tear. "I wonder," he then said thoughtfully, "if this Rolath Guelph would have a suit made for me, one that I could wear." He scribbled out a note and put it in with the next batch of stuff. The reply came back almost immediately. "I can't promise anything, Mr. Merton, but I'll see what I can do. R.G." "Well, that's that," sighed Peter. "I'll just have to wait." Another week passed, and Peter got no word from Rolath Guelph. He did, however, get word from another group of men. He was sitting comfortably in his office, pondering on what to do with all his money, when the intercom on his desk buzzed. "There are some gentlemen from the Treasury Department to see you, Mr. Merton," said Irene's voice. She sounded scared. "Send them in," Peter said. Come to think of it, he felt a little uneasy himself. The two brisk, official-looking young men who came into the office identified themselves as Mr. Brady and Mr. Brown of the United States Treasury Department. They wasted no time in getting down to business. "Now, Mr. Merton," said Brady, "we'd like to know how you're getting all this money." "Well, I saved it," he said. "That's not what I meant," said Brady. "I'm talking about several counterfeit bills that have been traced to you. Where did you get them?" "But they can't be counterfeit," Peter protested. "They are perfectly good bills." "Oh, they're good imitations, all right," Brown said. "The most amazing fakes I've ever seen. The paper is perfect. The engraving is beautiful. In fact, the only thing wrong is the serial numbers. Why, some of those numbers won't be printed on bills for 20 or 30 years yet." "Now, Mr. Merton," said Brady, "tell us where the plates are. Who printed these amazing phonies?" I don't know," Peter said. He stammered. Frightened, he didn't know what to say. He was afraid to tell them about Rolath Guelph and the time transfer. They'd think he was crazy. "It won't do you any good to lie, Mr. Merton," said Brown. "We got a search warrant this morning and went through your apartment. We've found the trunk full of money in your closet. Some of the boys are going over them now, down at the Treasury office." Peter Merton gulped and said nothing. He couldn't. There was a lump in his throat the size of a grapefruit. "Well," Brady said, "if you won't tell us, I'm afraid we'll just have to take you in. Come along, Mr. Merton." Still speechless, Peter walked out of the office between the two men. Peter Merton was sitting in a cell with his head in his hands when he heard the clicking of high heels down the corridor, followed by the heavy tread of a guard's feet. It was Irene. "I got a lawyer for you, Peter," she said breathlessly as she came up to the cell door. The guard leaned against the wall and inspected his fingernails. "I don't think he needs a lawyer, lady. What he needs is a goof doctor. He's flipped his cookie." Peter managed a faint grin. "I told them how I got the money," he said. "They think I'm nuts." "But Peter," she said, "why would Rolath Guelph send counterfeit money?" "He didn't," Peter said. "Don't you see? He got all that money out of a museum. There's probably bills there that were printed in every century for the next 1,000 years. He just sent some bills that won't be printed for 20 years yet." "Well, don't you worry. I'll do something to get you out," she said. "Couldn't we take them up to the office and show them how it works?" "I don't know. Maybe. But Brady said that even if I were telling the truth, they'd have to take all the money away from me." "I don't care about the money," Irene said. "All I care about is getting you out of this horrible place." Suddenly, a door opened at the far end of the corridor, and there were more footsteps. It was Brady and Brown, followed by a man Peter had never seen before. The stranger was saying, "After all, it's only fair that my client be allowed to prove his story, no matter how fantastic it is." "He'll get a chance," Brady said sharply. The stranger turned out to be Q. Bertram Leslie, the lawyer that Irene had engaged. "All right," Brown said to the guard. "Let him out. We'll take over." Then he looked at Peter. "We are going up to your office, Merton, to give you a chance to prove this screwy story you've been telling us about a time machine. I know it's going to be a waste of time, but justice is justice. Come along." It was after 6 o'clock when they arrived at the offices of Crabley and Company, and the office suite was deserted. Irene let the officers in with a key, and they went back to Peter's private office. "Okay," said Brady. "There is your magic safe. Do your stuff." As Peter began working the combination, Brown said, "By the way, Merton, you'll be interested to know that the Brazilian police have picked up this guy, Quiggs, who stole the 50,000 from you. He claimed he opened the package and there was nothing but a bunch of plastic in it, but the Brazilian cops think they've got a lead on it." Peter paid no attention. He wasn't interested in Quiggs's crime right now. He was only interested in his own. He swung open the door and looked inside. There was a folded note from Rolath Guelph. He opened it and looked. "Oh no," he said weakly. He sat down in a chair. Brady took the note from his hand and read, "Dear Mr. Merton, we of the Terrestrial Bureau of Historical Research want to extend to you our warmest thanks for your cooperation. We now have most of the information we want about your era. With the valuable information you have given us, we will be able to do a great deal more research, and will have much better success in pinpointing our future contacts. It is too bad we could not meet in person, but it is impossible to transfer living things through time. Rest assured that your name will go down in history books as one of our most valuable contacts. The transfer field will be shut off as soon as you receive this note. Naturally, a reversal of transfer will occur. With our warmest wishes, Rolath Guelph." Brady looked up at Peter with what could well be called a jaundiced eye. He said, "Did you think this would get you off the hook? How stupid do you think we are? Phony bills, a phony story, phony letter. Merton, you're just plain phony all the way through. Come on along, it's back to the hoosgow for you, and this time try—" It is difficult to say what Brady might have suggested that Peter try, for he never finished the sentence. It was interrupted by a sudden roar of sound that reminded him of a broken steam pipe. Suddenly the air was filled with books, magazines, papers, clothing, shoes, ashtrays, cigarettes, pencils, pens, candy, sandwiches, and 1,001 other things, all spewing from the safe like water out of a fire hose. Amid the confusion, Peter saw Irene running from the door, clad only in the sheerest of bra and panties. "Where is Brady?" shouted Brown. "Why did that girl run off? What happened?" "I'm not sure what happened," Peter said, "but Irene had a perfectly good reason for running off, and as for Brady—" He pointed toward the tremendous heap of stuff on the floor. One hand was groping feebly from its center. Irene sipped at her coffee, while Peter, sitting across the cafe table, explained to her. "Of course they didn't have a case against me without evidence. When all the money vanished, they had no evidence, so they had to let me go." "But I don't see exactly why the things vanished," Irene said. "What happened to my beautiful dress? That was terribly embarrassing." But very beautiful, Peter thought. "Well, as near as I can figure out, this time transfer business only works so long as the time field is working. As soon as they shut it off, everything went back to its proper time. All the things we gave them came back to us, and all the money and your dress and the other gadgets we got went back to the 30th century, where they belonged." "It's a shame in a way," Irene said. "We could have used that trunkful of money to get married on." Peter's grin broadened. "Don't worry about that. Remember, Old Man Crabbley gave me the right to keep any money that was recovered from Quiggs." "Did you get it?" Irene asked excitedly. "Did Quiggs tell where he hid it?" Peter shook his head. "Nope. He didn't steal it. I found the money in that pile of stuff in my office. Evidently, Rolath Guelph was trying out his machine and took the bundle of money and replaced it with another bundle of that queer plastic paper of his. When Quiggs sneaked in, he just stole the bundle from the 30th century, and he put a third bundle in. He got all the way to Brazil before he opened the package and found out he didn't have anything." $50,000, Irene said dreamily. "Well, that ought to be enough to start on anyway."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. Vassi by Art Lewis. Originally published in Worlds of If, January 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The apartment is called a single. It contains a Murphy bed, a chest of drawers, an overstuffed chair, a sofa, a coffee table, a 17-inch television set, a bookcase partially filled with the volumes A through F of an encyclopedia from the supermarket, assorted paperback books, and a radio that doesn't work. In the ceiling is a fixture with two 25-watt bulbs. A short hallway leads to the bathroom and the kitchen. Julia Fenway stood outside her apartment, fumbling in her bag for her keys. She had never had any trouble finding her keys before. Her purse was always neat and orderly. And she was breathing hard from the short walk from the bus at the corner and down the long corridor to the lonesome apartment door. Those keys! Where are those keys? I'm becoming a regular pack rat lately. Look at that bag. Did you ever see so much junk? She thrust her hand deep inside and felt around. A crumpled Kleenex, worn-out lipstick, change purse, pencils, movie stubs. A coldness. The keys. Her heart was pounding.
She pressed the hand with the keys to her bosom. It was pounding. At least it was working. She managed to get the door open just as the landlady's door down the hall gushed forth cooked cabbage odour, and Mrs. Schultz stuck her head out. Julia closed her door behind her until she heard the lock click. Of all the people in the world, why was it the Mrs. Schultzes she attracted? At the sound of the lock, the cat, Belle, poked her head out of the kitchen. She walked lazily into the room, rubbing her side along the wall to scratch off the sleep. Then she leaped to the top of the dresser and started to wash herself. Julia stood with her back against the door. Her arms, tired of reaching out, hung limply against her sides. A ray of sunlight streamed through the partly open window, and a little pool of it snuggled on her pillow. It had been such a long ride in from Beverly Hills and on 2 buses. She had sat in the back where it wasn't so crowded, and the smell of exhaust was still in her nostrils. She walked over to the dresser and put her purse down beside the cat and ran her fingers caressingly through the soft fur. Belle took a swipe with a hind paw. Julia rested her head on the dresser. "I'm going to die, Belle." The cat sat up and lifted a front paw. She washed it with little delicate strokes from her tongue. Julia moved over to the bed and sat down on the edge of it. She slipped her shoes off. Her feet hurt. They always hurt in heels. Why does one get dressed up to go see the doctor? He could have told her she had 6 months to live while she was wearing flats. He didn't actually blurt it out as I walked in the door. He fooled around under that sheet for a long time, and then he said it. No, not then either. He just looked pained and hurt and a little white around the lips, and he told me to get dressed and come into his office. He had the lab reports on his desk, and he pounded on them, and he said, "You're as good as dead now." I wish he had. Then I could hate him. I could hate instead of feeling numb all over. He didn't want to tell me anything. Just get ready for an operation. No, there really wasn't any rush, but soon. And then I dragged it out of him. I insisted I had a right to know. It was my life. No, I don't have any family here. No one. No one. A brother in New York. Don't call him. The doctor stammered like a schoolboy who's unprepared in class. Julia fell back on the bed. She stared at the unlighted ceiling fixture. She should cry, but she'd cried in the doctor's office, and there was nothing left to cry. 6 months to live. Maybe only 5 months. Certainly no more than 7 with the operation. A spring in the bed got her in the back. She ought to tell Mrs. Schultz to fix that. She certainly didn't want to spend her last 6 months sleeping on a loose spring. Spend her last 6 months! She turned over on her stomach and pressed her face into the blanket. Her body was rigid. She tried to contemplate her own death. She should call her brother. No, she would die first. "Hello. Excuse me. My name is Vassi." Julia raised her head and looked around the room. It was empty. "Would you say this is a typical prior dwelling?" Julia sat up. There was no one. "Oh, I hadn't thought of that possibility. I suppose we don't have a similar frame of reference. You'll never understand my thoughts." She got off the bed. She walked around the room, and her stocking feet made little padded sounds on the cotton carpet. Then she crossed to the door of the apartment and pressed her ear against it. "Are you a ventriloquist?" she said. "A ventriloquist? Oh, my, no. I'm a historian." The voice was in her head. "I'm insane." It had to happen. She touched her fingertips to her mouth. "Is that so? That's too bad. We're over and done with that sort of thing.
I'll wash my face with cold water. It must be the strain. I shouldn't have forced the doctor.
You are alone, aren't you? I looked around rather carefully. I didn't see anyone except that thing on that piece of furniture.
Julia looked at Belle. The cat was asleep on the dresser. She started to walk to the bathroom, but stopped in front of the bed and sat down. Her head was going to burst. "Please," she said. "Please stop."
I really don't want to intrude, but I have my recorder right here. It won't take long, and then I must move on. Now I noticed you're fully dressed. Most remarkable. We always thought you prior people indulged in sex orgies almost continuously.
My God!
Your thoughts are confused. Is it because you're insane? You haven't had much experience in thought projection, have you?
Julia jumped from the bed and ran into the bathroom. She locked the door behind her and turned on the cold water full force. She cupped her hands under the faucet and plunged her face into the cascading coldness. "My name is Julia Fenway. I'm a file clerk at Continental Insurance. I'm going to die, and I'm not preoccupied with sex." She turned off the faucet and stared into the sink. The water gathered into a little whirlpool and disappeared down the drain. There was a knock on the bathroom door. The voice was in her head.
I wonder if I could see that. We have some rather indistinct writings on running water. I'd like to bring them up to date.
The cold water didn't help. If anything, it was worse now. The knocking came from the door. She was sure of it. But the voice was inside her.
"May I come in?"
Julia sat down on the edge of the tub. She squeezed her head between her hands. "I don't deserve this. What did I do to deserve this?"
"Please, I'm on a tight schedule."
"So am I. Go away." She was talking to it. She was talking to the voice in her head. Then it was very quiet. Julia watched the door, waiting for someone to walk through its solidness. Nothing happened. She lowered her head and started to count the tiny tiles in the floor. "If I count one row very carefully, it will take me 5 minutes. 2 rows, 10 minutes. 3 rows. She started to count. As she was midway through the 4th row, the voice said, "I don't think you realize the importance of my visit. We recognize your right of privacy, but don't you feel in this case—" Julia jumped up and pulled open the door. "Let me die in peace!" She ran into the other room and stood in the middle of it, looking all around, breathing hard. Belle leaped down from the dresser, her doze finished, and rubbed against Julia's leg. The water in the bathroom was running. She hadn't shut it off. But she had. She had! The water started again. It stopped. It started. It stopped.
How quaint!
"There is someone here." "Who are you?"
"Vassi."
"Vassi?"
"I'm Chief Historian, Research Division. It's my first trip in time. The scientists have been playing around with this thing for years, and they've only just let us take it over."
"A time traveller?" Julia stood very still. Her eyes searched the room slowly once again. The window was open about 3 inches, too small for anyone to squeeze through. The door was locked from the inside. There was absolutely no one in the room. In a desperate state, she was hunting for an out. She was involved in a fairy story. Her body started to relax. "I can't see you, Mr. Vassi. I can't accept death. I'm looking for escape."
"You can't see me? I'm standing right in front of you."
"I can't see you."
"I don't understand. I can see you. Here, take my hand."
For a moment Julia hoped. There was nothing. "Why, I can't touch you." Not even a breath of wind. Julia walked over to the dresser and took a package of cigarettes out of her handbag.
She carried it over to the sofa and sat down. "You walked through me." She lit the cigarette, inhaled deeply, and blew out the smoke in a long, steady stream. When she was a little girl, and she had a sharp pain in her side, her mother would say, "It's only gas. Hold on, it'll pass." She would hold on. "Mother, help me." The voice in her head. "I wish I had paid more attention to those scientists. What was it they said? I had so much to do before I left. Something about transporting living matter. Are you sure I'm invisible?" "I can't see you." "Do you people have trouble with your eyes?" "No, that's not it. I can't touch you. And I'd expected to bring back some artifacts. I'm terribly disappointed." "I'm sorry." "And well, you might be. It's going to be extremely difficult going around asking people a lot of questions when they can't see me. You must have had quite a start." "Stop it! Stop it! My head! Oh, dear God, my head!" Julia got up. "I'm going out." "You are having trouble with the thought projection. I'll sit down and be quiet for a moment." The voice stopped. Julia paused at the door. The room was quiet. Breathing. She heard breathing. Her own? She held her breath. It was there in the room. She was sure of it. It was a whisper in her throat. "You are real." The faucet, the water, the knock on the door. "You are real." If she held on, it would pass like gas. "You are real." She moved trance-like back into the room. "You see me now?" "No, I heard you breathe." "Can you touch me?" "No." She heard her own blood in her ears. Her own breath forced itself between her lips. His breathing was gone. It was a dream. She said, "You're gone." "Over here, on the arm of the couch." She turned. She fought to silence herself. She heard the soft breathing from the direction of the couch. "Who are you, Mr. Vassi?" "It's just Vassi. No, mister. I already told you who and what I am." "A time traveller from some distant future," she said. "Most of your records disappeared in the final war. We want to pick up the traces. Best way to do that is to travel back in time." "It sounds like such a long way. How long?" If it was true, it was a miracle. If it wasn't... Julia, you're a realist. "It would be a meaningless term for you. It's an age, an eon away." Julia sat down on the edge of the overstuffed chair. She noticed a faint layer of dust on the coffee table. The apartment looked messy with a bed out of the wall. Ever since the first visit to the doctor 3 weeks ago, she hadn't thought of cleaning. "I'm afraid the apartment doesn't look very presentable." "Aren't you comforted to know that the world has survived?" "But I won't survive." She looked at the dust again. "You see, I don't do much entertaining." "Is that so? I wouldn't know. Do you mind if I record our conversation?" "I don't mind. It's nice to have someone to talk to, even if I can't see you." "Julia, you're a realist." "Yes, well, that is a bother. Now, would you mind telling me a few pertinent facts about civilization as you know it?" "I don't think I know too much about that sort of thing," said Julia. "I'd hoped to land in the middle of a library of some sort." His voice broke off. "You don't seem to have much of a collection of books here." Julia said, "Are you near the bookcase?" "No wonder the records didn't last if this is the way they were kept." "Vassi, can you touch the books?" She got up and went to the bookcase. "Yes." "Pick one up." "They're no use to me. This isn't history." "Pick one up." "I haven't got the time. I have to move on." "Vassi, You touched the faucet, didn't you? And you knocked on the door. Yes. That does mean I can bring back artifacts. Why can't you touch me? Now I have to get to a place that will do me some good. A library, a store. Isn't that what you call them? A museum. Are any of these things nearby? Let me go with you. I'll be your guide. I'll show you my time. But won't you be uncomfortable? I'm invisible. I don't care. No one can steal you from me this way. Steal me? Vassi, why can't you touch me? I'm not too sure. I think it's because you're alive. You see, life is a transient thing. Matter is continuous in one form or another. Matter existing today always existed and will always exist, or something like that. I didn't listen too carefully. Anyhow, it's possible for someone to travel back in time, but not ahead. Do I make myself clear? It's out of my line, you know. Julia reached down and scooped up Belle. Can you touch her? What is that? My cat. Can you touch her? A cat? My, the anatomists would love to see that. But it's the same as with you. My hand passes right through her. Julia put Belle back on the floor. Her mind was racing. Vassi said, She's sitting right where I'm standing. I've got to believe it's not a nightmare. I've got to believe you're real and that you can help me. If I can do it quickly. I have so much else to do. Others are waiting to use the machine. Are people well where you come from? Very well, thank you. Are there any incurable diseases? She tried to listen for his breathing. Incurable? You mean sickness that doesn't respond to treatment? No, of course not. Then take me with you, she cried. You just said you wanted to guide me here. Take me with you to your time. I can't do that. I can't even touch you. There must be a way. You have got to think of something. Even if I could take you, I'm not supposed to. Why? It would mix up history to remove persons from their time. It might even be dangerous with artifacts. I suppose we couldn't hold on to them very long. History? I have no history. I'm going to die very soon. No one depends on me. I have no one. Please take me, Vassi. I feel very strange. Are you all right? Yes, I just feel odd. How? First you want to guide me. Then you want to come with me. You don't care about mankind's survival. You sound so terrified and confused. Julia sank down on the couch. If only she could see him. Don't leave me to die. How strange to talk about dying, said Vassi. We all live so long we never think about it. You will take me with you, Vassi? If people in your time have such short lives, then why does dying trouble you? It would seem a matter of course. Vassi, I haven't lived yet. This is out of my line. I'll tell you what, when I return, I'll talk to one of the scientists. If they're interested in the project, they'll send someone back. How long will that be? Now, let's see if I can figure in your time. I'd say about a year. Julia closed her eyes. She felt dampness under the lids. Her voice was hollow as she spoke to the empty room. I'll be dead in 6 months. And the voice in her head echoed, 6 months. Vassi, isn't there someone you can talk to now? He didn't answer her. Julia looked around the room. Vassi, are you still here? Vassi? Vassi, if you don't talk, I can't tell if you're still here. Vassi, please answer me. Did I talk too much? I didn't mean to run on about my problems. I know you have a job to do. Maybe you can squeeze me in. I don't want to keep you from your work, Vassi. You didn't go, did you? You didn't leave me. Don't leave. I believe in you. I believe in you. And now she had the aloneness she had longed for. He was gone, and she would be left with the Mrs. Schultzes and the doctor. She went from the living room to the kitchen to the bathroom and back into the living room, listening, hoping to catch the small sound of his breathing. But her body would not be quiet, and she heard nothing except herself. She stood for a long while, looking down at the bed. The sunlight drifted from the pillow onto the covers, and finally spilled off of the foot of the bed onto the floor, and the room was a shade darker. She was a stone, but a stone whose blood gurgled, and stomach rumbled, and heartbeat and pulse pounded, so loudly she could hear nothing else. Her legs gave way, and she crumpled to the bed, and she was silent at last. The breathing came from the direction of the window. She spoke into the covers. "Vassi, why didn't you answer me?" "You tempt me, and I have so much to do, so much ground to cover." "You can come back?" "We haven't got enough of these time centers. There's quite a line-up to use them. If I go now, there's no telling how long it'll take me to get back." Julia got up and went to the window. "Am I facing you?" "Yes." "You're my only hope, wild as it seems. Vassi, wouldn't it be helpful to your research to have a real live person from my time to study?" Vassi spoke slowly. "You mean you would be willing to have us study you?" "Within limits. No, not within limits." "They'll be very angry if I come back without my research project." "Are people that cold in your time?" asked Julia. "Cold?" Vassi repeated in bewilderment. "Heartless?" "Heartless? I hardly think so." "I mean callous, without pity, without compassion." "I've been very busy. I haven't thought about it." "Do men and women marry in your time?" "Yes, they do." "Are you married?" "No, you see, I'm not very presentable. Besides, I have my research." "To me, you're the most beautiful man in the world." "You can't see me. If you saw me, you wouldn't think so." "I can hear you. That's all I need." Julia turned from the window and walked back to the couch. When she sat down, she could feel herself trembling. Never in her life had she spoken to a man like that. Maybe, if she could see him, his eyes would be mocking her. She said, "If you take me back with you, then later, when I'm well, I could come back with you and show you everything you would want to see. Then I could be your guide." He was standing in front of her. She could hear him breathing again. There was excitement in his breathing, she was sure of it. He said, "I wish I could touch you. You're very beautiful." "Vassi, in my own time I'm ugly. Perhaps I belong in your time." Then the excitement that was in his breathing was in his voice. All right. I'll see what I can do. You wait right here. It may take me several years to get back, but I'll do it if I can." "Several years? Vassi, I can't wait that long." She was very near despair. No, you don't understand. In your time it'll only be a matter of minutes. The controls would be set to right now, however long it may take to have the project approved in my time." The room was quiet. A slight breeze drifted in through the open window. Julia sat very still on the couch for a few moments. Belle rubbed herself against the coffee table and then climbed into Julia's lap. She had to hold on. She had to believe. A world with no illness. A world where people live practically forever. A world with Vassi. She scratched the cat behind the ears. Belle started to purr softly. "Belle," Julia said,
What am I going to do with you? Vassi will think of something. He's coming back, Belle. He's coming back, and he'll take both of us with him. She picked up the cat and put it on the couch. Then she got up and went to the mirror over the dresser. She pushed her hair back from her face. He said I was beautiful. Not even my mother ever said I was beautiful. What will they think at the office when I don't come in tomorrow or even phone? They won't think anything. They'll get Sheila with the black hair and the big bust to do my work, and they won't think about me at all. Even that one didn't say I was beautiful. Not even right after I moved in here, and he was a little drunk, and he could have said it then of all times, but he didn't. He just looked a little ashamed, maybe disgusted afterward, and he talked about being late for a dinner appointment. There was a knock on the door. Julia whirled from the mirror. Vassi must have gotten a little off course. She hadn't thought of that possibility. She walked quickly to the door. "Vassi?" she asked. "It's me, Mrs. Schultz." "What do you want?" "You went to the doctor today. I expected you'd come by. Tell me, how are you?" "Go away." "Julia, open up. Maybe I can do something for you." "Go away. Please go away." "You're not feeling so well?" "No." "Bad news, maybe?" "I don't want to see anyone, Mrs. Schultz." "I understand. I'll come back later." Footsteps went down the hallway. A door opened. The sound of a television set. A door closed. "Vassi, hurry. I don't know whether or not it really happened. I'm not sure now, Vassi. I am going out of my mind. I am clutching at straws. Come back, Vassi. Come back. Reassure me."
"They said it would work."
"Vassi!"
"They said it would work, but it sounds like a terrible risk. We'll do it with a cat first."
"Vassi, where are you?"
"Right in front of you. Now listen carefully."
"Are you going to take me with you?"
"We'll try the cat first. If it works with a cat, then we'll try you."
Julia was trembling. "What do I do?"
"The first thing we have to do is kill the cat."
"What are you talking about?"
"When the cat is dead, it will become as inanimate an object as any of those books over there. In that state, I should be able to transport it to my time. There, the doctors will revive it. Everything is ready." "I can't kill my cat." "If it works, it's only temporary."
"And if it doesn't work?" she whispered.
"I'd rather it be the cat than you."
"I never dreamed."
"We'll have to hurry. They are waiting."
"I can't kill Belle."
"You're not killing her. You're transporting her."
The tears were in Julia's eyes again. "It's crazy. I'm crazy."
"Look, I'd do it, but I can't physically touch the cat."
I know.
"They said suffocation was best. It leaves fewer complications."
Julia bent down and picked up the cat. Her tears fell on the animal's fur. She held it close to her. The cat was quiet, unknowing. Julia said, "Do me first."
"Even if I could, I would not," said Vassi. "The cat first."
"I've had her since she was a kitten, a little round ball with a button for a nose. I can't do this to her. If it does not work, this is my madness, not hers."
"What were you going to do with her 6 months from now?"
6 months. Alone. She would be left alone. Belle has never been alone except for the hours when I'm at work. Who would take care of her? She's such a fussy eater. I have to feed a liver from my hand."
"You'll be together."
"Together."
"Take one of the pillows on the bed. Don't think about it. Do it."
Julia carried Belle over to the bed. As she tried to put it down, one of its claws became entangled in her dress. The cat started to struggle as it finally awakened. Julia reached over for a pillow. Sweat stood out on her forehead. Her tears blinded her. She saw the mass of fur. She saw the softness. The claws were freed. She brought the pillow down over Belle. Julia blacked out, sprawled across the pillow. She couldn't have been out long. She pulled herself from the bed. The pillow was on the floor. Belle was gone. Vassi's voice was in her head. "It worked. The anatomists are wild. I've never seen so much excitement."
"Belle is all right?"
"Wonderful. It took them no time at all to revive her. The laboratory is a bedlam. Everyone wants to examine her."
"How should I do it? I'll never be able to suffocate myself."
She laughed a little.
"I can't even turn on the gas range. Mine is electric."
She looked around the apartment. If she slashed her wrists, there would be too much blood. She hated blood. The thought of poison repelled her. Wait, she had it. She pulled one of the sheets off the bed and twisted it. She pushed the overstuffed chair into the center of the room and stood on one of the arms to attach an end of the sheet to the ceiling fixture. At the other end, she made a noose. There was a knock on the door again.
"Julia, if you're not well, it's no good you should be alone," Mrs. Schultz said.
Julia slipped the noose over her head.
"Vassi, do you love me?"
"Of course. I just hope you'll love me." Mrs. Schultz knocked hard.
"Julia, I hear you talking. I know you're home. Let me in. I have some soup for you." "Vassi, do you think I'm beautiful?"
"The most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Mrs. Schultz pounded on the door.
"Julia, why don't you answer me?"
As Julia stepped off the arm of the chair, she saw the open window. A thought crossed her mind before the noose tightened. Belle could have jumped out of the window when I passed out.
"Julia, you're a realist."
Mrs. Schultz put down the pot of soup and opened the door. The apartment is called a single. It consists of a Murphy bed, a chest of drawers, an overstuffed chair, a sofa, a coffee table, a 17-inch television set, a bookcase partially filled with the volumes A through F of an encyclopedia from the supermarket and assorted paperback books, and a radio that doesn't work. In the ceiling is a fixture with two 25-watt bulbs. From the fixture hangs a twisted sheet with a hangman's knot in the end of it. The noose is quite empty. So is the apartment.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now for the next story. The Prophetic Camera by John McGreevey. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, August 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Joey Barrett set his camera carefully to one side and swung onto the edge of the desk. He knew this annoyed Nugent, and at the moment nothing gave him greater satisfaction than his ability to irritate the editor. His heels thunked against the highly polished sides of the desk, and he shook his head very deliberately, in rhythm with the heel hammering. "No," he said. "I don't think so, Nugent." He decided the drumming had lost its impact, so he crossed his legs and turned to face the balding man behind the desk. "Why should I? This assignment's out of my line, and you know it." Nugent nodded. "I know, but this is an unusual story, Joey, and I'd like to get a photographer's slant on it." "Want to find out how the other half thinks, huh?" Nugent referred to a memo. "This is the address." He pushed the slip of paper toward Joey. "I think you'll find this Jason Ewing most cooperative." "He's a crackpot." Joey shied away from the memo and slid off the desk. "That's why none of your brainy reporters will touch the assignment." He's eccentric. Nugent didn't bother to hide his impatience. What inventor isn't? He's an inventor? New kind of camera. That's where you come in, Joey. Nugent leaned back in his swivel chair. I want a photographer's reaction to it. What's so special about his camera? Nugent didn't look at Joey. It photographs another dimension. There was a moment's silence. Nugent was abruptly preoccupied with his hands. Joey moved slowly toward the desk. Another dimension? You mean stereopticon stuff? With depth? Nugent stood. No, I don't think that's what Ewing means. He moved from his desk to the window. I want you to find out what it is. Get all the information you can. Are you sure this doesn't belong on the comic page, Nugent? Dusk was settling over the city. Nugent stared out at the darkening skyline. I'll admit it sounds crazy, but it'll make a good human interest yarn. He turned back to Joey. Just bring in the facts, and one of the rewrite boys will put them in shape. Joey Barrett's chin set doggedly. You've got no right to ask me to. But he didn't finish. His editor had abruptly moved in very close. You're in no position to quibble, Joey. What does that mean? Nugent's thin lips were tightly compressed. The management's not happy with you. Joey's laugh was brittle. Nugent walked slowly back to his desk. I've had more and more complaints about your work. Joey was close behind him. I take the assignments you hand me, and there's no one on the staff gets a sharper shot. Nugent waved this aside. It's your manner. He pushed a glossy 8x10 print toward the photographer. You play up the grisly, the macabre. Joey stared down at the picture. A slow smile narrowed his eyes. I photograph what I see. I figure it's what your readers want to see too. Nugent sat heavily. We had 100 phone calls about that picture. Brutal, sadistic, morbid. The print fell face up before Nugent. He turned it over. Joey laughed. Sure, it's all those things. And they loved it. He leaned very close to Nugent. You didn't have to print it. It was the only shot I had. It was print it or be scooped on one of the big stories of the year. Joey's outward nonchalance failed to mask entirely his inner tension. When I take a picture, they remember it. There's a difference between memorable photography and cheap sensationalism. The editor picked up the memo with Ewing's address. All things considered, he said, I think you'd better get this interview for me. Joey stared at Nugent for an insolent second. Then he took the memo. He checked the address, jammed the paper into his pocket, and moved quickly to the door. Hand on the knob, he paused. Oh, Nugent, he called. If you can't see the story I bring back, just remember, it's in another dimension. He slammed the door on Nugent's anger. Early evening traffic was heavy as he pulled into the quiet, old-fashioned street where Ewing lived. Sober brownstone houses, their front steps rising steeply to stained-glass-panelled doors, heavily curtained bay windows, weather-stained and rotting gingerbread, an atmosphere of reluctant decay and genteel senescence. Ewing's house was like a dozen others in the same block. Joey was not a man given to hunches, and yet, as he climbed out of his car and stood staring up at the silent house, he could not repress a shiver of apprehension. He looked up the street. Nothing marred the quiet. A middle-aged woman hurried home with her armload of groceries. A man paraded an ancient dog on a leash. Slowly Joey climbed the steps. His apprehension was no more than the resentment he felt for the assignment. He yanked the old-fashioned bell and listened for its echoes dying deep in the house. He fidgeted impatiently. Perhaps old Ewing wasn't at home, or maybe he was so eccentric he no longer answered the bell. Joey jerked it again. On the traffic-noisy boulevard a block away, he heard a raw squealing of brakes. Joey sighed and turned away. He'd wasted an hour. He stared down the steps, and the door opened. Jason Ewing was very old. His incredibly blue eyes seemed alien in the yellow parchment face. His clothing, his manner, even his speech were archaic. As Joey shook the bony hand, Ewing was apologizing for the delay. "I was in my dark room," he said, the voice strangely resonant to come from so frail a chest, "and I had to get the developer off my hands." Joey nodded and stepped inside. The atmosphere of the house was a curious mixture of chemical and decay. There was a layer of dust on the bric-a-brac, and as Joey followed the stooped figure from the entry hall into the living room, he saw Ewing as a kind of insubstantial ghost, moving through the deserted rooms so carefully that the dust was not disturbed. Ewing gestured to a chair, which looked prim and uncomfortable in its yellowed antimacassars. "Sit down, please, Mr. Barrett." He switched on an ornate table lamp. "It's most kind of you to be interested in my work." Joey gave him the automatic smile. The room was a combination studio and parlour. A bulky antique camera lorded it over the conventional furnishings. Its unblinking eye regarded Joey coldly. There was a fireplace with massive brass andirons cast to resemble griffin heads. Purple draperies at the window were faded by sun and time. The heavy furniture was defiantly shabby. Even the antique photograph album with its plush cover and gold-plated clasp and lock was right for the room. This was Jason Ewing's world, and Joey felt himself to be an alien. Ewing hovered nervously, white fingers clenching and unclenching, reaching out, now and then, to touch the album on the dusty tabletop. "I know you're a busy man, Mr. Barrett," he said, "so I'll come at once to the point." Joey relaxed as much as he could in the old chair. "I should tell you first, Mr. Ewing, that I'm not a writer. I'm a photographer. My editor thought maybe you and me would talk the same language." Ewing bobbed his head up and down. "Excellent, excellent." He pulled up a small chair. "Believe me, Mr. Barrett, I hesitated a very long while before I decided to make my discovery public." Joey disguised a grin. "What finally decided you?" Ewing closed his eyes. "I'm not well. Heart. Most unreliable. Doctor tells me I may die at any time." "I see." "But before I die," the old man said, leaning forward again, "I must share my secret." He seemed to have difficulty in finding the words he sought. It's so extraordinary, Mr. Barrett, that I've been afraid to divulge it." He gave a sad shake of his head. "People today are so unwilling to accept the unusual." Joey writhed inwardly. This was worse than he had thought. He would make Nugent pay. "Mr. Nugent said something about your photographing another dimension?" he prompted. The old man pushed himself to his feet. "It was accidental. I've dabbled in amateur photography for years." He limped over to his camera. "Not only took pictures, developed my own." He paused and looked very directly at Joey. "About 6 years ago, I began experimenting with a new developer." Ewing's eyes were disturbing. Joey looked away. "You had used commercial developers before?" "Yes." Ewing gripped the camera. "I wanted a developer that would give me a more sharply defined image. I tried 50 different formulae, never quite achieving what I had in mind." Joey lit a cigarette. "You must have spent a lot of time on it." "I had retired.
I live alone here. No other interests. The phrases came in little gasps, as if Ewing had to force the words between his lips. Made no progress. And then I tried formula number 53. The pause indicated Joey was expected to react. Formula number 53? Ewing moved back to the light. My 53rd experiment. Radical departure from commercial developers. It succeeded? It succeeded, Mr. Barrett, but not in the way I had imagined. The fish-white hands rested on the photo album. I developed some film in formula number 53 and received the shock of my life. His voice was a whisper. The pictures on the negatives were not the pictures I had taken. He paused to watch the effect on Barrett. Joey scratched his ear. You took one set of pictures, and the negatives you got were of another set? I know what you're thinking, Ewing said. What I thought at first, that I'd gotten hold of the wrong film. But that wasn't the answer. The same thing happened again and again. Whenever I used formula number 53 as my developer, I produced a strange set of pictures. Joey stood up nervously. The old boy was crazier than he had first guessed. Humouring him seemed the only answer. That's incredible. Ewing nodded excitedly. I thought I was losing my mind. But slowly I began to realize what had happened. What? The old man sank into the chair by the table. School of modern philosophers teaches all time is coexistent. Joey felt almost sorry for the old boy. He was so much in earnest about his crack-brained discovery. Time coexistent. Past, present, future, all simultaneous, running along in parallel dimensions. Joey tried to laugh. Little rough for me, Mr. Ewing, he apologized. Look, he went on quickly, I've been thinking... But Ewing wasn't listening. Simplify it. At this moment, Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Columbus is discovering America. You and I are talking. A man in the 25th century is rocketing toward Mars. I see what you mean. Ewing was holding the old-fashioned photo album in his lap. Well, I know now that what I've stumbled into with formula number 53 is another dimension in time. You mean that you can take a picture of what's happening in another time? Ewing nodded. I know it's difficult to grasp, Mr. Barrett. He held out the plush-covered album. But I have proof. Joey stepped toward the old man. You've got pictures in there? Pictures of this other dimension? Yes. He fumbled in his vest pocket, found a small key, and with trembling hand inserted it in the album lock. I've never shown anyone these pictures before, he said. Despite himself, Joey felt excited. Even as he dismissed Ewing as a hopeless crackpot, he was disturbingly eager to see the pictures in the old album. Ewing gestured for him to be seated. Joey sat in the chair near the table, and the old man handed him the open album. So far, Ewing said, I haven't been able to control the process. I photograph a subject, and the picture may be projected 10 years into the future, or 100 years into the past. There must be an infinite number of dimensions registered on the film, but my developer varies. Joey's initial eagerness was quickly dissipated. The photographs in the album were disappointingly ordinary. True, there were some that seemed to be trick shots, and a few in which the costuming was unfamiliar, but certainly nothing to document the old boy's claim. Aside from a few shots that were interesting because of their violence, there was nothing in the album. Ewing waited for Joey's reaction, the parchment face even more deeply wrinkled by excitement, the blue eyes blazing. Well, Mr. Barrett? Joey left the album open at the picture of a gruesome accident. Apparently,
2 cars had met head-on. The one had been a sleek convertible. The other was an old sedan. Both were terribly crumpled. Glass littered the street. Steam spewed from the twisted radiator of the old wreck. A man sprawled from the front seat of the sedan, an elderly man with a white beard, a beard spattered with blood. His sightless eyes stared accusingly at the small cluster of onlookers who surrounded the wreck. Nearby, thrown from the crushed convertible by the impact, lay a woman. She wore an extreme evening dress, and a fur cape had fallen not far from her body. All around her were pearls, spilled from the broken strand at her throat. Joey looked up at Ewing. He shook his head. "You've got some interesting pictures, but I can't see that they prove your theory. They could have been taken any time." He pointed to the photo of the wreck. "This one, for instance." He smiled up at the old man. "That looks like a shot I might have made." Ewing's entire body seemed shaken by his eagerness to prove his point. "Mr. Barrett, that picture is of an accident that hasn't occurred. One evening I took a picture of the street out there, at the corner, where our streets join the boulevard." His voice was low, urgent. "When I snapped that photo, the street was deserted. There were no cars, no people." Joey took another look at the wreck. He closed the album with finality. "Mr. Ewing," he said, "I'm not questioning your sincerity. I can see that you're convinced your developer has extraordinary powers." "But you don't believe me!" There was despair in the old man's voice. "What can I say to make you believe that you just looked at the picture of an accident that's yet to happen?" Joey laid the album on the table. "It's an interesting theory." Ewing moved to his camera. "It's more than a theory. I can prove it." He ducked behind the camera. "Let me take your picture, Mr. Barrett, and I'll prove it." "Wait a minute." Joey half rose from the chair in protest, and then, with a shrug, subsided. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" "Thank you," Ewing answered. He focused the camera, cut on extra lights, posed Joey, took his picture. The ordeal over, Joey moved toward the door. "You'll see, Mr. Barrett. This picture will convince you." Joey nodded. Sure. You give me a call." They were in the entry hall. "As I said," Ewing continued, "I haven't much time. That's why I'm very anxious to pass on my discovery. It could do great good, in the right hands." Joey opened the door. "I understand," he said. "You give me a call." "I will." Joey was outside, the door between him and Ewing's pathetic eagerness. As he bounded down the steps, he was devising a revenge extreme enough for Nugent. He slipped in behind the wheel. It was surprising that anyone as near psycho as Ewing should be loose. The old boy had lived too long alone in the empty house. Just as he drew away from the curb, Joey heard the crash. Squealing rubber, splintering glass, rending metal, perhaps a human scream, compounded into an awful discord that ricocheted against the quiet brownstone fronts, building to a crescendo of metallic anguish. After the first moment of surprise, Joey experienced the curious exultation he always felt at a scene of violence. The trip wasn't a waste after all. He'd get a picture, and from the sound of the crash, it would be a good one. As he clambered out of his car, camera ready, people were running down steps, cars were swinging off the boulevard, the first cluster of the curious was collecting. With professional assurance, Joey brushed people aside and moved in. One car had been stopped at the intersection, and the other had careened off the boulevard and smashed head-on into it. Joey stopped on the crowd's inner edge and stared. It was impossible. One car was an old sedan, the other a sleek convertible. An old man with blood-spattered white beard half spilled from the sedan, and on the glistening pavement lay a woman in evening dress, surrounded by dozens of pearls. From habit, Joey took the picture of the accident and delivered it to Nugent. By the time he had developed his picture, he was beginning to enjoy the knowledge that it was an exact duplicate of the photograph in Ewing's album. Only he and Ewing realized the power of Formula number 53. It couldn't be coincidence. The details were too exact. Ewing's explanation was the only one possible. And that meant the old boy wasn't crazy. The formula was all he insisted. Such a formula could be a great force for good, the old man had said, in the right hands. In the hands of Joey Barrett. Joey decided to keep his secret. This was not a power to be shared with Leslie Nugent or anyone else. So when he faced his editor again, he was careful to dismiss the Ewing interview with just the proper degree of casualness. "There's no doubt about it," he said. "Ewing's a crackpot." Nugent scowled impatiently. "Even so? I tell you, if we run the story he gave me, we'll be laughed out of business." Joey watched Nugent closely. "But surely as human interest, Jan," the editor protested, "we'd be justified." Joey shook his head. "He's an old crank, trying to build up his ego with his phony claims." Nugent leaned back. "There was absolutely no basis for his theory?" "None." Joey laughed easily. "You should have seen the obvious trick photos he tried to pass off as evidence. My advice is, forget Jason Ewing." There was a long pause. Then Nugent nodded. "All right, thanks, Joey." He picked up a glossy of the accident. "You outdid yourself on this one." Joey sauntered to the door. "The master's touch," he called. "I'll hit you for a raise later." Satisfied that Nugent considered the Ewing story dead, Joey left the paper and hurried to a payphone. When Jason Ewing answered, there was a note of near hysteria in his voice. He seemed frightened by Joey's interest and was extremely reluctant to give him another interview. "I don't blame you for being irritated," Joey said. "I was very rude. But look, Mr. Ewing, now I see I was wrong. We can't talk about it on the phone. All I want is a chance to see you again. Maybe tomorrow?" There was such a long pause that Joey thought Ewing had broken the connection. Then he heard the old man sigh. I don't know what to say," Ewing faltered. "In the light of recent developments, I think it would be unwise to involve you, Mr. Barrett." Joey laughed. "Listen, this is the break of a lifetime for me. How about tomorrow morning at 9? "Tomorrow." The one word was neither affirmation nor question. But Joey chose to interpret it as agreement. "See you in the morning at 9, Mr. Ewing," he said, and hung up quickly. Joey slept little that night. He was up early, gulped a hasty breakfast, and stood on the steps at Ewing's house at 5 minutes to 9. Again, as on the day before, he had to ring the bell twice before the door opened and the wrinkled face showed itself. He was shocked by the change in Ewing. The man seemed much older, and there was a haunting fear in the blue eyes. "It would have been wiser," the old man whispered, "if you had not come here again, for us not to have met." Joey was determined to be charming. He put his hand on the thin old arm and gently pushed Ewing into the entry hall. "I don't blame you for being bitter," he said, closing the door. "I was a fool yesterday." Ewing pulled free and moved agitatedly into the living room. Even the morning sun made no impression on the shadows there. The old man didn't look at Joey. "You were right," he said.
It would be better to forget the formula. Joey fought down his impatience. He tried to move smoothly, keep his voice calm. No, you mustn't think that. You can't be selfish. You said yourself, Mr. Ewing, that this knowledge could do great good. The quiet persuasiveness of Joey's approach seemed cause for further alarm. I said that, but since then, I see that it might also do great harm. He tottered away from Joey and slumped tiredly into the chair by the table. Mr. Ewing, Joey said, following him, yesterday I saw one of your pictures come to life. Ewing did not look up. I know. The accident at the corner. I was afraid you had seen it. Afraid? Joey laughed. That was the clincher. He leaned over the old man. Listen, Mr. Ewing. The second I saw that wreck, I realized what we have in Formula number 53. I want to help you make use of it. The proper use. The old man shook his head. I'm afraid, he whimpered. Joey ignored the interruption. We'll work this together. If we play it smart, the sky's the limit. We can be millionaires. Name our own prices. He laughed in his excitement. They'll meet our demands when they see what we've got to offer. Ewing had slowly pushed himself to his feet. He regarded Joey with mixed apprehension and disgust. You can't commercialize my discovery, he protested. I wouldn't permit the formula to be used for personal gain. Not just my gain, you and me together. Joey looked at the red plush photo album and rubbed his hands. I bet we got pictures in that album worth 100 grand. Abruptly, Ewing stepped past Joey and seized the album. He cradled it in his arms. That's out of the question. He tottered toward the fireplace. Mr. Barrett, he pleaded, I beg you to go now. Anger simmered in Joey, anger and frustration. All right, he said, forcing himself to be reasonable. Those are your pictures. He faced Ewing at the fireplace. But if I take some, will you give me the formula so I can develop them? Stubbornly, the old man shook his head. What is the formula? Joey demanded. I've never written it down. Ewing clutched the red plush photo album with one hand and gestured imploringly with the other. Mr. Barrett, every moment you stay here, you jeopardize us both. Leave now, please. Forget we ever met, that you ever heard of Formula number 53. Forget? Joey's hands clenched and unclenched in mounting desperation. You can't start a guy on a thing like this, Ewing, and then tell him to forget it. For a long second, they stared at each other. Ewing was breathing heavily, and perspiration beaded the parchment face. Joey tried another tactic. Look, if you don't want to give me the formula, at least let me have a few of the pictures in that album. Whatever I get out of them, I'll split with you. He reached out tentatively. Ewing shrank back. Go away! Let me alone! There's nothing in the album. I burned the pictures. You're lying! The thought of the money the old fool had thrown away cut into Joey like a knife. You wouldn't do a crazy thing like that. Only 2 left. Should have burned them. Panic seized Joey. He grabbed at the red plush album. I don't believe you. Let me see. Ewing held onto the book with the tenacity of an aged crab. You mustn't, he croaked. You're destroying yourself. Don't. But the old man's stubborn and futile resistance stoked the smouldering fires of Joey's anger. He gripped one corner of the coveted trophy with his left hand, and with his right gave Ewing a vicious shove. With a rattling cry, the old man staggered back and fell with a clatter into the fireplace. The book was in Joey's hand. He didn't look at Ewing. The clasp was not locked. Feverishly he opened the heavy cover. The truth took his breath away. Ewing hadn't lied. The pages were empty. He had burned the pictures, the crazy old fool.
But he had said there were 2 pictures left. Joey thumbed hastily through the empty album till he reached the first of the remaining pictures. He cried out. It was a self-portrait of Ewing. He lay sprawled on the floor before the fireplace, blue-eyed, staring up at the ceiling, blood smearing his temple and one of the massive brass andirons. Joey dropped the album on the table and slowly turned. He closed his eyes. "Oh, God," he whispered. "No, no!" Like a sleepwalker, he moved to the silent figure, knelt, searched in vain for pulse or heartbeat. There was none. Jason Ewing was dead. Joey stared at the andiron with its telltale stain. He pulled himself up into a half-crouch and looked wildly around the dark living room. The camera was an accusing eye. "It was an accident," he murmured. "His heart. He was an old man." The photo album still lay open on the table. Ewing had saved 2 pictures, one of himself, the other. There was a heavy knocking at the front door. Joey went shakily to the album. Gripping the table's edge, he turned to the second picture. Joey Barrett sat in a chair. His trousers were slit. His head was shaved, and there were straps and electrodes. It was the kind of picture that would sell 1,000 extra copies. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Remember the 4th by Noel M. Loomis. Originally published in Future Combined with Science Fiction Stories, July 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. This was a warm day in August, a very warm day. Slim Coleman, my partner in detection work, says the sun is 90 million miles away, but this day it must have sneaked up pretty close. You could even see the heat waves coming up off the sidewalk. You can't fry an egg on the pavement in Fort Worth, though, because you can't stay out in the sun that long. I mopped my brow, slung the water off my fingertips, and went into the lobby of the National Bank building. The washed air made it cool and nice in there, and I slowed down to enjoy it. But one of the elevators came down. The door slid open, and the first man to get off was Swanberg, the building manager, our landlord, all dressed up in striped trousers and a fancy vest and wearing a high wing collar and a genuine cravat. He looked impeccable, immaculate, and cool. I wheeled and marched back outside into the sun. Slim and I were 3 months behind with the rent, and I figured the only reason Swanberg hadn't ordered us out was that he just hadn't got round to it. I didn't want to run into him. If we could have paid our rent, I wouldn't have been carrying ham sandwiches and a bottle of coffee in my coat pockets up to Slim Coleman while he worked on the brain finder. The heat almost smothered me after the coolness of the lobby. Damn that guy Swanberg, anyway. He was always so perfect, so completely unaffected by the weather, so supercilious and so cold, so mechanical. You knew he'd never had any trouble, and never would have, because he would never be swayed by anything but cold logic. It's only we humans with sentiments who get in trouble. It was his untouchableness that griped me. He was so inhumanly perfect, he always made me feel rough and uncouth. You know how it is. If I could just get something on him to throw off that complex, I'd be happy even if we did have to vacate. I guess I spent my time daydreaming about Swanberg. Swanberg wearing an old-fashioned nightcap. Swanberg slurping his coffee. Swanberg sleeping with his socks on. anything human. What wouldn't I have given to have a picture of him in the roller coaster the way I had been the night of July the 4th, with a perfectly strange, perfectly gorgeous, slim blonde throwing her arms around his neck the way that one had around mine. I was willing to bet he had a big, hefty wife at home who made him step. I shivered whenever I thought about that blonde. She was the kind I would have liked to marry. Only one like that was way out of my reach. I didn't have much education, and I didn't always know what to do around a real high-class female. That's why I had been riding the roller coaster alone. Well, there was nothing for it now but the coal chute. A truck was backed up to the sidewalk, and two very black-faced men were pushing coal down a steel chute through a manhole in the sidewalk. I ducked into the alley, and rolled the bundle under my arm, and threw out a pair of khaki coveralls. I hated this, but I did it anyway. I had to. We couldn't afford to have my suit cleaned every time I went in through the sidewalk, so I got into the coveralls and zipped them up. I watched around the corner. When the truckers raised the steel bed, I walked up to the open hole in the sidewalk and dropped in casually. I'm a short man anyway, a little on the chunky side, and that coal hole was like a furnace. The sweat poured down my back and chest, and the coal dust poured into my nostrils. I got out of there as fast as I could, and took the freight elevator to the 22nd floor. I went through the hall, unlocked the door, got inside, and locked it again. "That you, Doc?" came Slim Coleman's deep voice. "Yeah." I held the coveralls out of the window, slapped the coal dust out of them, took off my damp suit coat, and laid it on top of the desk, got the electric iron out of the desk drawer and plugged it in. Our sign said, "Coleman and Hambright, private investigators," and we had to maintain appearances, but I wish we could afford a store-bought pressing. I brushed my pants, but they were damp too, so I took them off and laid them out on the desktop, over some papers, with the creases pinched tight. I mopped my brow and went into the other room. Slim Coleman looked up from a workbench covered with wires, tubes, condensers, and all kinds of electrical gadgets. He had a soldering iron poised above something that looked like a 48-tube radio. He had deep, deep brown eyes that always looked through everybody. But Slim was 100%. In fact, it was his loyalty that had us behind the 8-ball now. If he had dissolved partnership, instead of offering to pay the damages the time I fell from a second-story window and went through a skylight into a whole tableful of expensive orchids. But no, Slim paid it all. $2,200 before he got through, because the cold air ruined a lot more orchids. And I hadn't even gotten the evidence I was after. No, it was just happenstance that I fell from the bedroom window of a movie star. "What luck?" said Slim in his husky voice. "I served them. But look, Slim, I hope you get that brain finder going pretty quick. Not that I mind crawling under the length of 3 Pullman cars and cutting my ankles on the cinders to serve divorce papers on Tom Ellingbury, who's worth $1 million. Not that I mind doing all that for a measly $5, but when I have to come through the sidewalk in the summertime to duck the landlord—" Coleman's face lighted up. "The brain finder is ready for a tryout," he said. "Shall I show you yourself the night of July the 4th? Well, partly because I guess I didn't have much real faith in the gadget, I said, "Okay," and went to get the 4 ham sandwiches and the coffee in a milk bottle out of my coat pockets. That was why I couldn't take off the coat when I put on the coveralls, for fear of spilling the coffee. Then I groaned and ran for the desk. There was a brown puddle spreading on the desk and soaking up my coat. I very nearly said, "Damn." "I've got your brain wavelength," Slim was saying. I started mopping up with my handkerchief while I hung the coat up to dry. "Now, all I have to do is—" "Come here, Doc."
I put the sandwiches on the bench in front of him, but for once Slim didn't even reach. He looked at me, and his deep-set eyes were burning. "We are going to be the greatest private investigators in history," he said. "In fact, we'll make history. Doc, we'll be the most important men in America." I should have been more enthusiastic, but things were going so badly. "I don't care," I told him, "about being a great man, if I can just quit ducking the landlord. I want to walk in under his nose and not be scared of him. If you want to fill my cup to overflowing, just let me use that thing long enough to get something on him." Slim was already turning dials. Tubes were lighting up. The set was humming. Pretty soon he pointed to a screen, and I damn near lost my breath. There on a screen, about 12 by 18 inches, big enough so there wasn't any mistake, I saw myself on the night of July 4th, just as I bought one ticket for the roller coaster. I guess my eyes stuck out a foot, for Slim was looking at me with that kind of sad smile. "Roller coasters," he said gently. "Got enough, Doc?" I gulped. "Plenty. Cut it off, please." In the screen I saw the blonde just behind me, and I didn't want Slim to see her put her arms around me when the roller coaster went over the dip. Slim smiled and snapped a bunch of switches. The lights in the tubes went out. "Think what this will mean in criminal prosecutions, to be able to follow a man in the past. Present-day testimony will be archaic. The courts won't have to take anybody's word for anything. They can follow a man and watch him in the past." "Judge Monday wouldn't admit that kind of evidence," I pointed out. "Naturally not. It will take 25 years to get this kind of evidence admitted in court. In the meantime, we'll have to go easy. But we can make millions just by bluffing. When we know that a man was playing poker in Jones's basement until 6 o'clock Sunday morning, then we can bluff and put it over. Just so we don't tangle with a real tough guy the first time. For instance, shh, somebody's at the door." Slim ran to the door, while I ran for my pants. I ducked back into the other room and got them on. I heard the voice. It was a man's voice, and I'd heard it before, just recently. I peeked out. Yes, it was Tom Ellingberry. I stayed quiet. "A pot-bellied little guy just served divorce papers on me," he said harshly. "I got off the train and came here. A friend of mine sent me. I want your services." "Yes," said Slim. "Here's $100 bill," Tom Ellingberry said. "Start shadowing my wife. Get something on her. I'll give you 5,000 to get something. 10 if it's necessary," he said with a slight leer. Slim gravely picked up the C-note. "We don't do business that way," he said. "But if your wife has been misbehaving, we'll find it out." Ellingberry was a big man with a sharp go-getter look about him. He stared hard at Slim, and Slim stared back. Ellingberry's expression didn't show anything. Then he left. Slim locked the door after Ellingberry, and I took off my pants and set up the ironing board on the desk. Slim went back to adjust the dials on his machine. "This gadget is a sort of super-sensitive radar," he said as it warmed up. "I can tune it to your brainwaves and pick you up anywhere within 40 miles or 3 months. A purple indicator began to wink. "It proves I've got brains anyway," I pointed out. "Yes, your waves come in at a frequency of approximately 1,832,956,000. That's as close as I can tune it so far, but that's plenty close enough. There are other characteristics, such as power and damping and height of crest and so on, that make it selective enough to pick out any one person in the United States if it could reach that far." "And then you can see everything I do?" "No, I can only see what you see with your own eyes." Then I must have been staring at the blonde. I held my breath when I asked, "Can you tell what I'm thinking?" "No," I breathed again. "I can translate what you say into language, though. Something happens when I throw 220 volts into this bank of tubes. As near as I can figure, it creates a time warp, which doesn't mean much of anything objectively. I don't know how it works. I couldn't even duplicate it. I suppose some high-powered electronics engineer could figure it out, but I don't want anybody but you and me even to know about it. What I'm interested in is what we can do with it." "What I'm interested in," I said, "is how much money we can make with it." Slim looked at me with his great burning eyes while the steam rose from under the iron on my pants. "You're about to find out." The ground glass screen slowly lighted. A new bank of tubes began to sparkle and then settled down into a greenish glow. Slim turned dials, and there was the figure of a woman on the screen. "That," said Slim, "is Mrs. Tom Ellingberry." Well, of course, I couldn't see her face. She was playing bridge, apparently. Her hands looked nice. The woman at her left said, "I hear you filed suit against your husband." Mrs. Ellingberry reached for a king, but her fingers were nervous. She played a 6 instead and lost the trick. "Yes," she said quietly, "I have." Her voice was sad. I waited a minute, then, "How did you know how to tune in on her?" I asked Slim. "I got her wave characteristics when she came up the other day to get us to serve the papers," he said. "I got Tom's today when we were talking. The machine was all set, and the recording needles made a permanent record." I swallowed. "Can you get the landlord's characteristics too?" Slim held up a sheet of ruled paper. "Got his already. I was just practicing. I got him when he was trying to hammer the door down yesterday." Suddenly, I felt a deep peace. I had the landlord in my power now, and I didn't have to hurry. I could take my time. But Slim notched me down. "Get this 100 changed," he said. "Give the landlord 50, and then have the telephone connected again." I took the 100. "Get some more sandwiches, too. We'll be here late tonight." Well, the landlord wasn't as sarcastic as I had feared. He defrosted slightly when he saw the 50. Now we owed him only 200. I knew he was probably going to put us out on September the 1st, but I soothed my hurt feelings by imagining him walking around in his shorts. There is nothing else that will so undignify a man. But before long, in fact, as soon as I could get to the brain finder while Slim wasn't watching, I'd get the facts. We watched Mrs. Ellingberry for 4 straight nights and days. She went visiting. She played bridge. She shopped. She never did give more than a second glance at any man, and she didn't talk to any man over the phone. We could see her only when she looked at herself in the mirror. That was enough. We followed her like 2 bloodhounds from the time she ate breakfast until she went to bed at night, but Slim turned the machine off when she sat down to remove her stockings. Slim always was a gentleman. We went back in time, fast, flashes here and there, but Mrs. Ellingberry was like Caesar's wife. On the 5th day, Slim called Tom Ellingberry and told him he was dropping the case, that his wife was above suspicion, and it wasn't worthwhile to watch her. I was glad, but Tom Ellingberry swore. Anyway, he said he'd send a cheque for another 100. Then Slim sat back and looked at me. "Now," he said quietly, "we'll turn this thing where it belongs." I'd been hoping he'd go out for a sandwich, now that we dared to use the passenger elevators, so that I could sneak a preview of the landlord biting his fingernails in seclusion. But no. Slim fixed his deep eyes on me and said,
We'll see what Tom has been doing recently. Do you realize he hasn't been in the picture but once in 5 days? Tom was it, all right. We trailed him that night to a big apartment house across town. Yes, it was a blonde, only this one had a considerable help from a bottle of peroxide. Slim made a deal with Mrs. Ellingberry's lawyers. We were to get 5 triple O's if Mrs. Ellingberry won. So Slim spent the weekend trailing Tom for the past 3 months, while I wrote it all down like a chronological history of the war. I was tickled over July the 4th. On July the 4th, Tom and the bleached blonde started out with a popcorn picnic and wound up, you guess, riding the roller coaster. I could just imagine what old Judge Monday would say to that. That little scene would be worth half of the property settlement. We were short on time. Some way or another, Tom Ellingberry had rushed the trial, and it was set for August 30th. We turned over our notes to Mrs. Ellingberry's lawyers and sat back and waited. Private investigators never go near the courts unless they have to. At 4:30 that day, the telephone rang. Slim listened, then he hung up. Tom has got a couple of shrewd, tough lawyers, he said. We have to go to court. Tom isn't admitting anything, and he isn't taking any bluffs. He demands proof. Well, I said, for 5 M notes, I'll tell anything. Slim was worried. He talked to her lawyers, Youngquist and Rubicam, that night. The next morning we were both in court. It was direct examination. Slim identified himself. Then he was asked, You have investigated Tom Ellingberry's activities over the past 3 months. Yes. Slim was very self-composed. Did you, on the night of August 26, observe him going into an apartment house at this address? Yes. And so on. But never a word of where Slim was when he saw all this. Very clever, I thought. But when I looked at those sharp-eyed young fellows at Tom Ellingberry's table, I knew it'd never get by. Presently Mr. Youngquist said, You may inquire. I held my breath. But one of the young fellows looked up and said, Are you going to put his partner on? Yes, said Mr. Youngquist. With that understanding, there are no questions of this witness, Your Honour. I jumped as if I had sat down on an electric riddle. It was plain even to me. They figured Slim was pretty sharp, so they'd wait for me, and in the meantime they wouldn't tip me off by asking Slim any questions. I wished I could have held my breath for about 3 days. I got along all right with Mr. Youngquist. I was careful not to say anything about where I had stood or sat or walked. I said, Yes, I followed him, because I did follow him, with my eyes. Then Mr. Youngquist turned to the young fellow and said, You may inquire. The young fellow got up slowly and looked at me easily and gently. But it was still August. I was sweating. I knew it was coming. I looked at Slim. Slim was sweating too. I looked at Mr. Youngquist. He wiped the perspiration from his forehead. You say, the young fellow began softly, that you and your partner followed Mr. Ellingberry from sometime in June. Yes. You testified, I believe, that on the night of July the 4th, Tom Ellingberry and this girl were at the amusement park. Yes. And I believe you have cited some 8 or 9 dates up to the 15th of July. I looked at Mr. Youngquist, and I was astonished to see his face the colour of bleached muslin. Well, did you or did you not? I looked at Slim. He was puzzled too. Finally I nodded. Will you say it for the record, please? Yes. That is to say, you are now testifying that you followed Mr. Ellingberry on each of 8 or 9 occasions prior to July 15th, and each time with your partner at your side? Yes.
And always at Mrs. Ellingberry's request. Yes. That was a nasty question, but it had to be answered yes. Were you here in court yesterday? No, sir. I would have said, No, your Majesty, if it would have helped. You didn't hear Mrs. Ellingberry testify that her suspicions were first aroused when somebody reported to her that on July the 4th, Tom Ellingberry was riding the roller coaster with another girl. I wish I could have jumped into the brain finder and gone back about 2 weeks. I would have walked through the sidewalk while the coal was being poured. No, I said finally. The young fellow looked triumphantly at Mr. Youngquist, who looked as if he would like to be buried in ashes up to his ears. That's all. Mr. Youngquist rallied and put Slim back on the stand. Then there was a recess. Mr. Youngquist and Mr. Rubicum and Slim and Mrs. Ellingberry and I went into a big huddle out in the hall. That's what comes of messing around with imbecilic things like this brain finder, Mr. Youngquist moaned. Why didn't we stick to straight law? Because we couldn't win that way, Mr. Rubicum reminded him. We didn't have any real evidence. Well, they decided the only chance to win the case was to have Slim tell about and demonstrate the brain finder. Slim didn't like to do that, but we needed those 5 Gs. That afternoon he told. The next morning we lugged it into court and set it on a table with a screen facing the judge. There was a crowd in court that morning, thanks to a news story in the Morning Herald. Slim groaned. Crowds aren't good for private investigators. I pricked up my ears when in marched Mr. Swanberg, our landlord, as austere as striped trousers could possibly make him, but with a beauteous blonde in a pink dress clinging as if she was afraid he'd get away. That opened my eyes. Maybe the old iceberg was human after all, to rate that kind of devotion. Maybe he did have an occasional moment of abandonment when he would lick the butter from his knife. If we ever got through this mess, I was going to find out. That's Mrs. Swanberg, Youngquist said to Slim. I looked his wife over in my best professional style. I thought I'd seen her someplace, and a detective is supposed to remember faces, but I couldn't quite place her. Anyway, there were now 3 blondes mixed in with that courtroom, and that's a lot of blondes. Mr. and Mrs. Swanberg sat down at one side opposite the jury box, where they could see the screen of the brain finder as well as the judge. I suppose Swanberg had read the story and wanted to see what we were up to in his building. Mrs. Ellingberry sat across the counsel table from me. She was a winner, if there ever was one. Slim went on the stand. He demonstrated the brain finder very feebly, that is, innocuously. It was obvious that Youngquist was scared to death of what might happen. And again, Tom Ellingberry's lawyers passed up cross-examination of Slim. I knew they were waiting for me. They were. Do you understand this machine? One asked me scornfully. No, sir. You know how to work it, don't you? Yes, I think so. Do you mean to tell this court that you can adjust the dials and gadgets on this thing and see what I was doing last week or the week before? I tried to be cautious. If it's plugged in. Okay, we'll plug it in. He invited me to step down and turn on the switches. I looked at Slim. He nodded. After all, there was nothing else to do. I went. Some of the tubes crackled, and then settled down to a steady green glow, and one bank showed purple. Then the lawyer said, Now, do you mean to tell me you can tune this contraption in on a man's brain and find him anywhere in the past? He sounded completely skeptical. Within 3 months, I said defiantly. For instance, you testified that Tom Ellingbury was riding the roller coaster on the night of July the 4th with the girl who has been named in this case. You saw this on the screen? Yes. Can you tune it in again? Well, I knew this was all preliminary. It would take something absolutely dynamic to convince Judge Monday that the brain finder was the real thing and not a fake, so I wasn't worrying. Yet. Yes, I said, and set the dials to Tom Ellingbury's brainwaves. I picked up Tom and the bleached blonde just as they stepped into the roller coaster car and followed them around the ride. It wasn't very sensational. She screamed and hid her eyes and grabbed Tom around the neck. Standard technique. Then the lawyer said, "Can you pick up your own brainwave on this thing?" "Yes." "What were you doing on the night of July the 4th? I swallowed. "I was riding the roller coaster." I think somebody snickered. "Can you show us?" "Yes," I said cautiously. I began to adjust the dials. Again, the amusement park flickered over the ground glass as seen through my eyes. I was in line. I put my money on the counter to buy a ticket. I saw a slim white hand reach up to the window from my left, and I started to turn. Then it hit me. That gorgeous blonde! That girl who had thrown her arms around me in the car a minute later. That was Swanberg's wife. I looked around at them in the courtroom. I knew what was happening on the screen. I hadn't looked at her face until she got into the car after me. Mrs. Swanberg was leaning over now, watching the screen. One arm was slipped through the landlord's elbow, and she was surreptitiously but affectionately patting the back of his hand. Swanberg himself looked completely blissful. What had she been out there alone for that night? Well, no telling. Maybe he'd been out of town, and she'd felt like doing something childish. Certainly there was no meanness or deceit in her face. She was in love with him, and he, in spite of all his austerity, was obviously in love with her. I looked out the window. There was no doubt that the fame of the brain finder by now would be all over town. Within a week we'd be flooded with work, high-priced work. We take only the very best cases, the highest priced, the least messy. We'd pay the rent. We'd eat in restaurants instead of carrying sandwiches. In another 3 months we'd be rolling in money, and almost without work. If we wanted to work hard with the brain finder, we'd make millions. I could maybe find myself the right kind of girl to marry. I looked back at the screen. I had just settled myself in the seat of the roller coaster car. A pink dress came into my field of vision on the right. Yes, sir, this demonstration would do it. This and those to follow. Whatever Judge Monday might say, there would be an appeal, and we'd have to take the thing to the Supreme Court, and how could any judge ignore it if Slim could show the judge himself working on his pet corn the night before? We were about to be what is vulgarly but happily known as in the bucks. What would happen to Swanberg? I remembered how I'd always pictured his wife as unattractive, and all of a sudden it made me feel kind of ashamed. He had certainly shown good taste in his choice of a wife. Well, pretty quick now I could afford to travel in that kind of company. I wondered what would happen when Swanberg saw his wife throwing her arms around me on the roller coaster. I guessed maybe he wouldn't be cold. He'd be jealous. Well, a man with a young and beautiful wife. Somehow it kind of got me. I mean that sort of calf-like happiness. He loved her, and he felt secure in the knowledge that she loved him. And, well, you know how it is. Gosh, how I wanted that money. Here it was within our reach, the thing we'd worked so hard for, the reason I'd crawled under Pullman cars and gone through the sidewalk and sneaked in to evade the landlord. Also, Slim could keep working on the brain finder. He had it now. Slim didn't know how to duplicate it, but one was all we needed. That one was worth a fortune. I looked back at the Swanbergs, sitting there so close together. Swanberg hadn't really been tough with us. In fact, he'd been lenient. 3 months was a lot to be behind. No, I guess the only thing I hadn't really liked about him was the fact that he was always so perfectly dressed and so cool, while I had to go through the sidewalk on a hot day in August and then press the sweat out of my clothes with a flat iron. I looked at the girl. She was nice. She hadn't been doing anything out of the way that night. She certainly hadn't made any sort of pass at me. And they were in love. I guess I had no business being an investigator. I looked at the judge, watching every move with his sharp old eyes. I glanced at Slim Coleman sitting there, looking a little puzzled, his eyes deep and burning. I tried to ask Slim to forgive me. I looked at the screen. The roller coaster car was pulling up to the top of the first hump. I took hold of the brain finder. It was heavy, but I picked it up and held it over my head. Then I heaved it onto the floor, and it was nothing but a mass of loose wires and broken glass. A woman screamed. Youngquist fainted. Slim came running with a question in his deep eyes. Tom Ellingberry's lawyer was triumphant. The judge pounded for order. This is 4 days later. Tom Ellingberry and his wife made up. Last night's paper showed them on the roller coaster. He was quoted as saying, "All I wanted was to ride the roller coaster." And she had said, "Boys will be boys." Slim brings me 4 ham sandwiches and coffee twice a day. He got acquainted with the blonde that Tom Ellingberry was riding the roller coasters with, and they went out to the park and had $5 worth of rides the night that Tom Ellingberry paid Slim the 5 Gs. Tom said it was worth that much to have his wife back. And do you know whom Slim and the blonde ran into at the park? Mr. and Mrs. Swanberg. First thing I ever heard of a man in a tailcoat riding the roller coaster. In fact, everybody's got a blonde, but me. And everybody's riding the roller coaster, but me. I'm not riding them now. I got 30 days for contempt of court. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI free. And free of charge, of course.